Thanks for tuning in today. I'm Dr. Nick, the Incrementalist. Join me as I seek out these small incremental changes being applied in other industries that we can learn from and that are being applied in healthcare. Can these changes bring immediate value, but also add up to the big improvements and the revolution we need in healthcare? Come along with me to explore the possibilities. My innovative guests from around the globe have used small incremental improvements to achieve their moonshot. And today, I'm talking to Richie Etwaru. He's the Chief Digital Officer from IQVIA and also a blockchain futurist. Richie, thanks for joining me today.
Hey, pleasure to be here, man. Excited to have the conversation. We've been having it in all other industries. Healthcare is a place to have it.
I too am excited about this because I think blockchain to me feels like one of those really inflection points in terms of technology that's being applied and the opportunity that it applies. But perhaps you can help some of my listeners out by sharing a little bit of just foundational knowledge as to what blockchain is. I think there's lots of descriptions about it, but how would you describe it to somebody that knows very little about blockchain?
Very good. We can probably get more complicated over time, but let's start with a simple description, right? If you think about the internet today, we've lost track of what the fundamental innovation of the internet is. We've sort of all deliberately or accidentally forgotten about TCP/IP and the protocol underneath the internet that helps to actually move information in a predictable and traceable way, right? And on top of that protocol, we've built a ton of different applications. For example, one of the early applications that was built on top of the TCP/IP protocol is AOL Chat, okay? But it was only one instantiation of it. Think about the amount of things that have been built over the years: YouTube, Uber, Facebook, cloud applications, all that type of stuff has been built over the years on top of the same TCP/IP protocol, okay? So blockchain is an underlying protocol, sort of like TCP/IP. Now it's different, but it's still a protocol. And there are apps that can be built on top of protocols. I like to say that AOL Chat, right, is the first real app that was built on top of the internet protocol. And Bitcoin is the first app that was built on top of the blockchain protocol. So Bitcoin is the blockchain, what AOL Chat is to the internet. And if you start there, then you can really, from a layman's perspective, you can stop and go, oh, I get it. I'm excited about Bitcoin because most of us want to make a quick buck on it, but I should also think about the protocol and think about where is the YouTube of blockchain, right? Where's the Facebook of blockchain? Where is the CRM of blockchain? And those are all the use cases that then get really, really, really interesting over time. We can talk about the actual invention of the protocol and how it's different from TCP/IP, but that's probably the best way to parse it so that you can place it somewhere in your head to even start to think about it.
So I think that's great. That really gives just an outstandingly clear foundation of what this could mean. I think it's it's not a panacea as such. It's sort of foundational technology. And since you bring up a couple of those innovations that we've seen based on TCP/IP, maybe I can ask you to give us an example, if there are any, in the healthcare space or perhaps outside of healthcare, where you've seen the application of this technology, or you can see that on a trajectory that's going to be similar to, let's say, a YouTube.
So before we get into the fuse cases, the future use cases, as I would like to call them, before we get into that, let's clarify very quickly what the fundamental inventions are. Okay, so there are two fundamental inventions that I want to call out. The first is the notion of immutable records. And by immutable records, we mean records that can be changed, but if they're changed, they're easy to know that they were changed. Right now, we live in a world where a significant amount of our data is stored in databases in tables, which are essentially ledgers, right, from like old ledgers. And the challenge with these is that it's very easy to go in and make changes to the records to benefit your own self-interest. And so as a result, when data is shared between one person or another, or one organization or another, you kind of need some tool or some person or some method or some piece of magic to look at that data and evaluate whether it was truthful or not, or it was massaged before it got to you. So we live in a world today where data comes to you and says, wink, wink, I'm data. It's your job to figure out whether I'm truthful or not. What blockchain does is it uses a series of technological inventions that change the records in a database in a certain way, where if you were to go in and remove one of the records or change one of the records, it is very easy for a human or a piece of software to look at that data and say, I don't know what the truth is for you, but I can tell that you were messed with and that somebody prepared you before you got to me. So we're going to go from a world where data comes to us and says, wink, wink, I'm data. It's your job to figure out whether I'm trustable or not, to a world where data comes to us and says, hey, I'm data. By the way, here's a really quick algorithm to test to see what massaging happened to me before I got to you. That's the first invention, right? And we can talk about use cases in a second. The second invention, so first is immutable ledgers. The second is distributed or decentralized computing. The other invention of blockchain is that copies, data sets will exist within the environments of all of the participants on a trading network. So if it's 7 companies or 700 people in 7 companies or 7,000 companies and 7 million people, a copy of the data will exist at the endpoints, hence the notion decentralized. And the idea and the consensus algorithms is that when transactions happen, everyone writes their transactions about a particular data set over some block of time. A consensus algorithm will look at all the transactions, figure out which ones have matched to the rules, figure out the ones that didn't play by the rules, move them aside, and take the ones that played by the rules and seal that block for everybody at the same time. Now, what does that do for you? What it does is it allows endpoints, humans, computers, machines, organizations to be on a network where integration to get data in real time much easier and much simpler, and where the ability to be able to know that the data that you're seeing in real time is actually truthful, and you don't have to wait for a batch job to prepare it, or you don't have to wait for 3 days for it to be reviewed and footed and you know, fixed up. You know that the data is there in real time. Those are the two real inventions of blockchain. And you can think about it in the word if you want to remember it. Chain is chaining the records together with cryptography so that they're immutable, or you could tell very easily whether they were affected. And block is over some block of time, finding all the transactions on the network, finding the ones that are rogue, removing them, and only taking the truth and sealing it onto the record. Now, if you think about where we are today in commerce, healthcare, automotive, whatever you think about, most of us depend on some data source that is being given to us by someone else or is being verified by some intermediary to know that the data is good. And most of us don't know that the data is good until about 60 days after, or about 90 days after, or sometimes a year after. And so you have to sort of look at the state of commerce that we're in to understand what the use cases will look like. So to your question specifically around healthcare, right? If you just think about something as simple as clinical trial data, okay? Clinical trial data right now is collected through, whether you're in phase 2 or phase 3, is collected from subjects within a trial protocol. And that information may not make it to the government until a year or 2 years after for submission. And that information goes through a significant amount of preparation and massaging before it gets to the government. And just start to think about how the government might look to clinical trials and say, hey guys, I'm not interested in those Excel files that you sent me before that are full of massaging. I want to see the evidence of the clinical trials on a blockchain to know that it's actually what happened and you didn't have to prepare it over time, right? Now we can get into more complex use cases, but it's important to start there to understand that it's a new addition to the human experience to be able to live in a world where you can easily tell when data was prepared for commercial reasons or commercial purposes, malintent or good intent, and to be able to know that in real time.
So I think that's helpful, but it raises the question, and it's something that comes up frequently when I talk to people about this, and I think it's part of the confusion. So I like to think of blockchain as a sort of blank canvas, much as your sort of analogy of the TCP/IP foundational solution. But one of the things that comes up around this distributed database and the immutable content is, gosh, this would be a great way to share healthcare data. But specifically, one of the things that jumps out about that for me, and I've heard repeatedly, is, well, that's all well and good, but I'm not going to put my healthcare record on a blockchain, because ultimately that blockchain is essentially publicly accessible to everybody. It's part of the sort of infrastructure that this is founded on. So it's not secure, it's not private. It is secure, it's not private. Is that true? And if so, how do you sort of see that in the context of where we use this, particularly for interoperability, because that's one of the exciting areas I see as an opportunity?
So allow me to be blunt, which is probably part of my trademark. That is a perspective from what I like to call fake experts, or maybe I'll just steal another Trumpism, shithole experts. Okay, the way blockchain works, and I've heard that before. It's coming from a place of lack of knowledge, right? It's actually the opposite of that. So the records are transacted, and they are encrypted where there are keys, public and private keys. Okay. And yes, you can decide which aspects of the record are viewable from a public perspective, and you can decide as the owner of the data which aspects of the record are private and share that private key with individuals so that only they can see that aspect of it. Okay. So that is a huge misnomer in the blockchain narrative. Everybody doesn't see everything. As a matter of fact, nobody sees anything unless they have the key to uncrypt the data. And that management of that key is one of the fundamental differentiators between Oracle or SQL Server and all the rest of old-fashioned databases that are there and these types of databases that we can see. What it also does, to your example specifically around sharing healthcare data, is it puts the power back in the hand of the patient to then decide who will see what, when they will see it, and revoke their ability to see it if they are not marrying the consent that was intended. And if you think about the consent chain inside of healthcare records, if you ever went to a doctor's office and you signed that 2-pager that you signed, if you ever read that, and then you look at the end of the supply chain when your patient data is sold to pharma, you will be very surprised at how much violations are going on in the consent that you gave in the doctor's office and how many times that record is being shared to different people across the world. So it's actually the opposite of that perspective.
I'm glad you said that, because I think that's really important for people to understand. And in fact, there was a paper published by Eric Topol and Leonard Kish a while back that essentially talked about this concept of not just the capacity for individuals to control their own data, but I think really importantly, the revocation of that access. So that's something that's almost unheard of in terms of our own data and our capacity to sort of control it. We give it, but once we've given it, it tends to be, it's lost to the world. But I think what you're saying, if I understood you correctly, is you can control this in a much more granular way through a blockchain concept.
It's not only granular, it's longitudinal as well. Right, so you can see how that consent evolves over time. You can issue that consent and revoke it, and you could also manage attribution back, right? To the extent that the data is used for purposes that are good and value is created or recognition is created, you can manage the attribution back. And this gets into all of the interesting but important discussions around anonymity and de-anonymize and things of that nature, right? I think the challenge that we're seeing right now, Nick, within the how should I say, the blockchain narrative in what I like to call, the rubber chicken circuit, where everybody's a talking head, right? Which we are doing right now, is you have to be able to partition those that actually built businesses and actually ran them from those who are just talking on stages and wrote books, right? I've heard of Eric Topol. I don't know who he is, but if he's built a billion-dollar business before, then he should have an opinion. If he hasn't, he shouldn't.
Just for those of you tuning in just now, I'm Dr. Nick, the Incrementalist, and today I'm talking to Richie Etwaru, the Chief Digital Officer for IQVIA and also a blockchain futurist. Richie, you're right. So people that have built and delivered, have a foundation in terms of the knowledge. So I want to talk, if we can, a little bit about what blockchain isn't. So you eloquently described the sort of misunderstandings or misrepresentation of this technology. Much like many of these other things, it still has the weakest link. So it's not a panacea for security, for example, or privacy, because ultimately, if I share my data with somebody, but they happen to have a breach, my data is still lost. Any thoughts around some of the misunderstandings around this and what it doesn't deliver? What should we not be thinking about?
Okay, very good question. So a couple of dimensions to think from. One is there are multiple instantiations of the blockchain protocol, just like there were multiple instantiations of TCP/IP, ARPANET, Euronet. At one point, we thought AOL was the internet, right? There were multiple instantiations of TCP/IP. There are also multiple instantiations of the blockchain protocol. Bitcoin is one instantiation of the blockchain protocol, and arguably one of the simplest instantiations of it. There is no Turing complete programming language on top of that instantiation of the protocol, so you cannot write really complex use cases inside of it. It has a very simple scripting language, and it has a very simple use case, which is to provide double-sided spending or double-sided allocation, right? And hence it's applied to coins, right? There is Ethereum, which is another instantiation of the blockchain protocol. There is Sawtooth, there's Corda, there's Hyperledger, there's Ripple, there's a ton, and they're all at different varying stages. But what is interesting about a new category of blockchain instantiations, largely led by Vitalik and Ethereum, is that you can add a Turing complete programming language on top of the blockchain protocol and write for other use cases other than double-sided spending so that you can get out of the cryptocurrency mindset, right? Right now, most of the activity that's going on blockchain is around cryptocurrency, right? Which, like, we don't have a digital currency in the world. I have news for people. The euro is 98% digital, right? We've had a digital currency for a very long time. So I think we have to stop worrying about currencies. Like, this whole behavior that's going on, Kodak rolls out a currency around, digital images and their share price goes up 40%. I mean, you just don't have to be born stupid to fall for that. You have to be a special kind of stupid. Like, you have to deliberately walk into it to fall for that, right? Overstock is rolling out a coin. People are going to put pancakes on a blockchain, right? I had pancakes this morning. That we need to avoid. Yes, we're going to have a cryptocurrency, just like we still have chat today. I use it in iMessage, right? I use it in Slack. Cryptocurrency is still going to be there, but it's not going to be 18 million different cryptocurrencies. So we need to be careful with that. What's interesting about the use cases that I think are actually going to change commerce fundamentally and where we should focus our attention are those use cases where there is fraud right now, where there's an imbalance of power, where there is secrecy, where there is low levels of trust. Those are the use cases that we should be focusing on. And what it's going to do is it's going to allow us to fundamentally change the model of commerce. And by the model of commerce, I say the following, and then I'll close with a specific answer to your direct question that you asked. I don't want to be too much of a politician and stare through your questions, right? Right now, we are in a model of commerce that I call the experience economy or the engagement economy. This has been going on for about 20 years, okay? And the way you differentiate is with, experience and engagement. And you need a large P&L to do that, but you also need to be agile around digital and social and mobile and all that stuff. We came from an economy that I call the price and product quality economy, which is you need a large P&L, you drive price down on product quality. Where I believe we are going is to an economy that I call trusted commerce, where the differentiator is trust and transparency. And, I'll give you a really simple example right now. I happen to own a restaurant as a hobby investment. And I don't manage the restaurant myself. There's a manager there. I barely go, but it's a great thing to have when you want to entertain friends, okay? And I don't look at anything other than my Yelp reviews. That's all I look at. I look at Yelp reviews. When I see a good Yelp review, I'm excited. When I see a terrible one, I call my manager and say, man, what happened? So a couple of months ago, I saw a one-star Yelp review. Someone complained that they had our shrimp meal. It was fantastic. They loved the ambience of the restaurant. Everything was fine. Price was good, but they got 5 shrimp instead of 6. And it's a one-star review. So I read it and I'm like, man, okay, I'm sorry that you got 5 shrimp instead of 6, but this is not a 1-star review. Maybe it's a 3-star review. So I clicked on the name of the person on Yelp. I'm like, I'm going to call this person. I want to talk to him, right? I click on the profile. The profile picture is the picture of a cat. And the name of the profile is Cat Lover 331. Okay? I don't know who it is. I don't even know if they ate at the restaurant. I don't even know if they purchased my meal. I did some research. I found out that 33% of the reviews on the internet, on average, are fake. A lot of the identities are fake. And what I realized after like 3 years of owning a restaurant is that the neighboring restaurant will pay people to write negative reviews about your restaurant. Now think about that for a second. Now imagine if OpenTable, which is a competitor to Yelp, were to roll out something that says, hey guys, we're going to put all of our reviews on a blockchain. And the additional data that we're going to put on a blockchain is we're going to bounce the review off of the point of sale system to see that person that's writing the review actually purchased that meal at your restaurant. And we're going to bounce it off the credit card companies to know that they had a transaction. And by the way, we have to verify their identity and maybe the GPS on their phone. And those reviews are going to be verified reviews on the internet. What will happen to Yelp when the restaurants go, I'm tired of this fake reviews. I'm tired of constantly having to deal with people who are bullying me, to go to a platform where you have trusted and transparent reviews. Now we could play that out over and over. I could play it out in the airline industry. I could play it out in the life sciences industry. I could play it out in healthcare. We could play it out in consumer products. But that's the bottom line. Every company is at risk of being disrupted by either a new entrant or their existing competitor who stands up and says, I am willing to be trusted and transparent about my supply chain and my cost structure and the economics of my business. And there's the competition. They're still lying to you. That's where it all ends.
Okay, so I think that's a great example. Can I ask you to finish with a 30-second thought around what most excites you about the potential for a blockchain application that could be incrementally applied in, and I prefer healthcare, but if it's not healthcare, I understand. So do you have a good example that really gets you fired up?
Yeah, I think the one that really gets me fired up in healthcare is pricing. I think there's a tremendous amount of dark corridors of pricing and process and value within the healthcare ecosystem. I think there's a lot of products and services in healthcare that should probably be more expensive. And I think there's a lot of products and services in healthcare that would be less expensive. But we live in a world right now where the consumer is being told, it's too much overhead for me to show you my supply chain and my safety data and my cost structure to justify my price. You just have to trust me that it's $2,000 for an EpiPen. Okay? That one gets me really, really, really excited.
I'm with you 100% on that. I think price transparency would be a big enabler in many of the sort of challenges in healthcare. So unfortunately, we've run out of time. As always, it's a great pleasure to talk to you. I thank you for being here and taking the time. I know you're busy. You've got lots of things going on. So Richie, thanks for joining me today.
Hey, thank you very much for having me. I hope that we can continue to have this conversation. What you're doing, Dr. Nick, is very important. We have to continue to drive these discussions because there's a lot of narratives in the marketplace that are trying to defend the status quo.
So thanks very much. That was Richie Etwaru. Thanks for joining me today. Do you have any better ideas, or have you found small incremental changes that have brought about a big improvement in your world? Let's continue the conversation on our hashtag The Incrementalist, or share with me at Dr. Nick1 on Twitter. You can find out more information about the show on our program page at healthcarenowradio.com. I'm Dr. Nick, and I'm the Incrementalist.